Good morning and welcome back to the Daily Wrestling News Show, where we are on a mission to teach, learn, and remember the history of professional wrestling with everyone that wants to join us. My name is Ryan Joy, and I'm joined today by John DeConi. We are talking about Tales from the Territory, Episode 7, Portland, John.
Yes, sir. The Pacific Northwest Wrestling, the Portland Territory, and another great subtitle on this one. I'll let you get to it.
Yes, where wrestling got weird. It's like it is a pretty good one. I am wearing a Hot Rod shirt because probably the biggest star to come out of the Portland territory has to be Rowdy Piper. You know, they said on the show that he was a greenhorn, so indicating that he kind of got his start there. And man, they showed clips of just little snippets of his interview work throughout the time, and he was exceptional. It seems like from the beginning.
Exactly. Like if you took the visual away and you didn't see how much younger he was or what his hair looked like, etc., it would be hard to tell the difference between that and some of the stuff he said on WWF television.
True. Yeah. You know, they said that there's roots back to the 1920s for this Portland territory. And if you do a little Googling, I think you'll find that there was wrestling in that area even before that, which is kind of a fun fact. But um, they said just in the beginning, they were talking about like if you didn't keep kayfabe in those days, the wrestlers in the locker room would beat the heck out of you in Portland. So um, a fun territory. They like all of them, they kind of refer to it as like this remote area. And I guess the Pacific Northwest in some ways is kind of remote. I mean, it's part of the contiguous United States, but not a lot of people are traveling through there, not as much as like the Carolinas or Texas or something like that. They're small, what appears to be smaller markets.
Yeah, you're not just passing through the Pacific Northwest. You're going there to whether you're going to Portland, you're going to Seattle, you're going to somewhere in that area. It's not, it's not a flyover state unless you count, British Columbia as a destination that you would fly over it for.
Right.
But
There are whole podcasts about the Portland territory out there. And to be fair, I have not listened into them, but I know there's some pretty big fans of Portland wrestling. And what's fascinating to me, and this is not the first time I've heard of a promoter doing this, but they didn't keep tape. They taped over it every single week. They use the same, in my mind, I'm visualizing a VCR tape, and they're just going over it every single week, um, which is a shame. So, like, history is, I guess, in theory, lost, but Buddy Rose
not
is like the
entirely.
savior, right? He taped it every week and kept the tapes. Now, Buddy Rose has passed away, so I don't know who has that collection. It feels like it's probably Jim Cornette or something, but
Yeah.
um, but that to me, it's just like, man, what would that library be worth right now?
Yeah. And they go out of their way to say that Don Owen, the owner and promoter there, was a businessman. And
Yeah,
that just seems like such a dropping of the ball. Like, how do you not think to archive? Okay, maybe he couldn't have foreseen home video and whatnot, but you know, how do you not? Especially, you wind up being something of a feeder system. Your stars are going on to bigger fame, and you know that the product is expanding nationally. Okay, maybe you don't have stuff from the '60s, maybe not by the '80s. How are you not thinking that this is something worth putting on Memorex?
yeah, yeah. The uh the thing that caught me off guard, I was like really fascinated by the fact that they did their TV in a bowling alley. It caught me completely off guard, and is what I guess it also caught some of the wrestlers off guard. So the people that were on the panel this week, I guess we should talk about that. Bushwhacker Luke, Mike Masters, the grappler Len Denton, and Princess Victoria. So Len Denton, he kind of comes in late to the scene, but he said that when he arrived, he was like, "Oh my God, I left Texas to come here to wrestle at a bowling alley." And Bushwhacker Luke, just off the side, says, "Yeah, from the Superdome to the supermarket." You know, a, a
It
very good mindset. Yeah, good.
Yeah, it really was kind of like it you were taken aback when they showed early in the episode like the entrance to the building. Okay,
Mhm.
like, and so they didn't show the building in very great detail, and a lot of the interior shots were pretty tight on the ring or up in the crow's nest. But the one shot that they had from the outside, it looked like the front door to a pizzeria. Like it just, there was no pizzazz to it other than a maybe a 10-foot wide by 2 foot high sign above it that said what was it, the sport, what do they call it? The Portland Sports Arena.
Yes. Which is a very fun name for a bowling alley.
The arena was not in quotes for some reason.
Right, right. Uh, so yeah, so it's interesting characters. Don Owen was the main promoter, and his brother Elton they introduced on this show. Who Elton, I guess, ran the territory from Eugene. So obviously, like most territories, they have multiple cities that they're running. Eugene is a couple of or a couple hundred miles away from Portland. So Eugene was kind of or Elton was in charge of the shows in Eugene,
Right.
and there were some really colorful stories about Elton. The one that the one that got me laughing out loud was the cigar story with Adrian Adonis.
Yes. Yes, that was definitely noteworthy. But yeah, apparently Elton was quite a character. He was drunk every night, always had a cigar in his mouth, and Adrian Adonis took the opportunity to pull a rib like the boys backstage were wont to do, and he would rub it in his unmentionable areas and then replace it in the ashtray, and everyone would kind of wait around biting their nails waiting to see if, or in more likely scenarios, when Elton would put the cigar back in his mouth and everyone would get a big laugh.
And he did. And then he would like smell it and he'd say, "Who the F shit in here?" and put it right back in his mouth, take a big hit. So hysterical stuff. So their panel that they had was, Princess Victoria, who said she was living in a hotel room before the guys actually found her. She was a fan before she kind of started wrestling.
A
So she
fan
comes
and
in. Go ahead.
a fan, and for all intents and purposes, a 14-year-old runaway.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really interesting when they tell the story later about going to Salem, which is her hometown, and her family being in the arena and getting all upset and stuff. Uh, it's interesting, her being a runaway and her
Sure.
family caring. It
Yeah.
seems kind of weird. Mike Masters, he's a big hulking type of guy, and he just sent in an 8x10. I guess that's how he got in.
Yeah.
Uh, Sheep herders, of course, coming from New Zealand, and talking about how they're tough guys and that the other wrestlers are not. Um, so every one of these territory ones, the go back to that thing with The Rock where he says in the opening thing where the business was protected and the passionate fans still believed. And Len Denton, he's coming in, like I mentioned before, the whole super dome to the supermarket,
Yeah.
and he jumps the barrier to get away from Billy Jack Haynes, and the fans just start taking free shots at him. So uh, the fans still believed in the Portland territory, and that's part of the Princess Victoria story, I guess, too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Go
So
ahead. I'm
she's, save that one for a little bit. What we should really talk about are the two main characters, basically, from Portland, is your Buddy Rose, Playboy Buddy Rose, and Matt Bourne. Matt Bourne being Doink the Clown, essentially. So, um, Buddy Rose, people might remember him. He from the WWF. He was the opening match of WrestleMania 1, losing to Tito Santana. That's probably where you'd see him the most. But he
not.
also feuded with Pedro Morales over the IC title in '82 and '83, and so he has the distinction, John, of losing the first match in WrestleMania history.
Exactly. And he was the funny thing, and Vince McMahon really had a knack for doing this, taking people who were well known in the territories and changing them just for the sake of changing them because they weren't his creation. The example being that opening match against it was Tito,
Tito,
right? Yeah.
Tito Santana.
Tito in the very first match of the very first WrestleMania, Not until we did our own little deep dive into WrestleMania 1 that you'll see at some point coming up. Did I realize that I knew the name Playboy Buddy Rose, but I didn't realize that was him because he's under a damn mask. He's one
Hmm.
of the, umpteen people who at some point in time in the history of the WWE went under the name of the Executioner.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this as we watched this episode. And Vince McMahon at that time, he was trying to go national, and he was buying up all the little territories, and he was aggressively, he was pursuing the Portland territory, and all of a sudden it clicked, because when you watch WrestleMania 1, the show sucks. I mean, it's not watchable really. But and it really doesn't feel like a super card when you're watching it, in the sense of the other super card events that you could look up and find in history, whether they be from Polynesian Pro or whether they're from the Championship Wrestling from Florida. There's much, much bigger cards. But if you stop and you analyze a little bit and you see, okay, well, they've got Matt Bourne on this card, who's the super hot baby face from the Portland territory. They
Yeah.
also had Buddy Rose on this card, who is the super hot heel from the Portland territory.
Mhm.
And then also Adrian Adonis in here, who was really big in the AWA, and he had a run here in Portland. And there's Roddy Piper, who is really big in Portland. So you have these certain guys that are really big in certain sections of the country that do show up to this show. So I'm kind of coming around to the idea that it was a super show. But oddly, the biggest heel in the Pacific Northwest is under a mask at WrestleMania 1. Very
Exactly. And it's not as if he wasn't known for his look, the bleach blonde hair, Playboy, he's supposed to be a pretty boy, and quite frankly, he's not necessarily a
little
terribly
soft.
good-looking gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a little soft around the edges, but like he is that his gimmick went with his look, and Vince puts him under a mask.
Yes. Yeah. But okay, so Buddy Rose, he started with Vern Gagne, and he understood that the key to getting over was to never break character. So Mike Masters tells a story about after the show one day, they're out there and they go to a liquor store to get some beer or whatever, and these two girls and this other young man ask for his autograph, and he says no, get out of here, because he's a heel and he's not signing autographs.
Yeah.
So with that with that, the kid kind of continues to badger him. So Buddy Rose just hauls off and punches him in the face, and then hurry up and get in the car and drives away. So he's an interesting character. That whole "don't break the kayfabe" thing. Len would come over and Len would talk about how Buddy Rose asked him not to hurt him before a match, and Bushwhacker Luke kind of says that Buddy Rose is pretty much a wimp, even
Yeah.
though he had this big facade. But I liked the story that Bushwhacker Luke told about him driving 100 miles an hour all the time.
Yes, and man, when he would drive 100 miles an hour everywhere, and if he got pulled over, he made sure to always have a little folding knife in his ashtray. He'd blade himself behind the wheel, and when the cop came to the window, he would claim I was just in a cage match or some kind of hardcore match, and I'm on my way to the ER to get all stitched up. And sometimes and not only would he most of the time get off, sometimes he would even get a police escort to the hospital, where he would wait in his car for the officer to leave and then promptly leave the
Yes.
hospital parking lot.
Yeah, and Buddy Rose passed away in 2009. He died in his 50s. Seems like maybe diabetic type of reasons. Matt Bourne, the other character, super hot babyface in this area. He was obviously most known for his run as Doink the Clown, where he wrestled at WrestleMania. He wrestled Crush at WrestleMania 9. He was the early Doink, the 92 to 93 version. He was actually fired for drug abuse, and there's stories out there about one guy turning him in, things like that. But so it looks like he actually also died from a drug overdose. So
Yeah, he definitely had his demons. I think I'm not sure how long he's gone, but I know
oh,
within the
2013.
okay, so within the last couple of years of his life, a buddy of mine, my college roommate, in fact, who lives on Staten Island, he calls me up one day and says, "What are you doing for WrestleMania?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of probably going to be watching it on the VCR because I got things to do. Blah blah blah. I'm not going to catch all of it live." He's like, "Oh, I wanted you to come to Staten Island." I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it." He's like, "Oh, I really want you to come to Staten Island." Why? It's like, the local bar is going to have Matt Bourne there, signing autographs, is that and the other thing. And he's like, it wound up that the turnout was abysmal. So my buddy Fitz spent most of the night watching Matt Bourne crawl inside a bottle at the bar. He just sat at the bar.
Oh,
The show was on the TV, and by the end of the night, he could barely walk out of the bar.
oh, that's a sad story.
So
But Matt Bourne, we also mentioned he died early, but it wasn't WrestleMania 9 wasn't his only appearance at Mania. He also wrestled as Matt Bourne for a time in WWF, and he wrestled at WrestleMania 1 in the third match. So you got Buddy Rose losing in the first match, Matt Bourne losing in the third match. Matt Bourne would lose to Ricky Steamboat. But in the Pacific Northwest, these two had an extreme blood feud. And John, I'll let you kind of set the stage for us.
sure. So Matt Bourne is the All American amateur, the amateur All American. He's a hard bodied white meat baby face. Buddy Rose is the dastardly villain. Tony Ray Bourne, Matt's sister, winds up dating, and they kind of alluded to it like maybe no one knew they were dating, and then all of a sudden within a couple of weeks Buddy Rose marries Matt Bourne's sister. And again, they kind of allude to the fact that no one was really sure if it was real, but they think they really did get married. And yet at the same time, no one at the table is surprised that the marriage is on the rocks within a month or two, because Buddy Rose really never stopped messing around on the side with his girlfriend Tammy, that they all remembered, at the snap of a finger. Oh, his girlfriend. Yes, Tammy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they go through a very public on-screen divorce, but presumably it was really happening off-screen too. And while they were having blood feuds in the ring, Matt Bourne is on multiple occasions attacks Buddy Rose in the locker room, went to his house one time and basically kicked in the front door. And there's even a story where Rose is driving Mike Masters home after an event one night, and he's afraid Matt Bourne might be waiting for him at his house. So Rose takes out his 357 Magnum and rests it on his leg in the front seat and pays Mike Masters $50 to go in the house and make sure there's no one in there first before Rose can go inside his own home. Like this was just as real off screen as it was on screen, which even in the era of ironclad kayfabe is just really mind blowing that these two hated each other so much, and there was so much realism in their wrestling storyline.
Yeah, and the whole time leading up to the fact that they got married, and then after they're married, that's all like part of the story as well. That Buddy Rose would be talking about how, you know, um, his wife, what's her name? Ray something.
Tony Ray.
Tony Ray. Yeah, Tony Ray said this and said that about Matt Bourne and stuff like that. And then yes, they go through the divorce, and all of this is on screen. And like you said, they couldn't really determine if it was a work. Some people really thought it was, but that was a legitimate wedding. And when Masters tells that story about having to go check his house, he's like, "Geez, this is not." I mean, regardless of whether the wedding was a work or a shoot, these feelings that Rose has, this this is a shoot. So, um, it all personal issues draw money was the first thing, almost the very first thing that was discussed on Tales from the Territory way back in episode 1 when they did Memphis, and boy, it is front and center on this one as well.
Yep. It in some way, shape, or form, it seems to come up in almost every episode, and it is a recurring theme for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, they talked about Rowdy Roddy Piper in this, but they didn't really go into too many stories about him. They just talked about, you know, there's basically two stories. One being that he had a match with the Sheep Herders. It was a steel cage match. His partner was Rick Martel. So Piper and Martel run down the aisle. They scale the cage. Martel hops over. The Sheep Herders are already in the ring. Piper goes to hop over. His kilt gets caught, and he falls down to the kilt's hanging from the cage, and he falls down, lands on his ass, and he's got all he can do to hold back his anger at the situation. The Sheep Herders have all they can do to hold back their laughter at the situation. So he told that story, and then Bushwhacker Luke also had another story about Piper's driving.
Yeah, apparently Piper was taking everyone to the next city, and they kind of alluded in the reenactment to the fact that they were probably drinking, but I think he got pulled over mostly because they came into one of those towns where you kind of come off the highway and you're doing 45 or 50 on a main road, and before you realize that you're in the center of town and the speed limit has gone down to 45, 35, 25, and it's meant basically to catch you. The cherries come on behind them, they get pulled over, they wind up in at the, whether it was the police station or the courthouse. The judge lives right next door. The officers basically knock on their door, knock on his door. He comes out in his robe and slippers. He's being, Piper's being arraigned right then and there. They have to come up with, between the however many of them there were, they come up with $250 to pay his fine so he can leave right away. But never one to let somebody else get the last word. Roddy and not Luke, but Butch peed on the, like basically they could see in the courthouse. There was a big open window. And they just started pissing on the window. And they could be seen. So I don't know how they weren't rearrested for public indecency, but the story goes that I guess they got away.
I think it was the judge's house, and I think what it was is like, if you imagine it, like the judge sitting at his desk, maybe like in like a split level situation, and the window is like behind him, behind his head, and they're peeing on the window, and if the judge just turned his head, he would have seen them. But that's kind of the vibe I got from the blurry video technique that they do. So, but interesting, Piper is an interesting character, and I talked about earlier Princess Victoria. Now, she's not really a name that I recognize very much. John, I know you were watching a little bit before me in the WWF era, and they said that she went through there. Is it a name you remember at all?
That was the interesting part to me. They said that she made her way to the WWF, and I'm saying to myself, for the life of me, I certainly don't remember. And I think I would have remembered at least the Native American gimmick, because she did wear a small head, the headband with just maybe like two feathers sticking out of it, and a lot of the jade jewelry, and natural skinned leather, like brown leather clothing and whatnot. I would have thought I would remember that, but like it would have stood out, but yet I do not recall her, not by name and not by look.
I guess the big angle that she was involved with in the Pacific Northwest, although it sounds like she worked there for quite some time, but the big angle was they were doing an 8-man battle royal in her hometown of Salem, and somebody had threw out the idea that maybe she should be in it. And so then on TV, Buddy Rose starts talking about all the different reasons why she shouldn't be in it. She's 125 pounds and I'm a man and blah, blah, blah. And then he says, here's the other reason why. And he smacks her across the face. And then she kicks him in the nuts. And off to the races we go. We got a hot angle going into Salem for her hometown. They draw a big crowd. And she is one of the final 3 participants. She actually believes that she throws one guy out, but Buddy Rose grabs his leg and they stay in. So now they're in a double team situation against this woman, Princess Victoria, and they hoist her up and they launch her into a brick wall. And she doesn't really come out and say that she bladed on the way down, but she also says that she hit the wall and she's busted open and it was Buddy's idea. So the Buddy's idea makes me think that she bladed or whatever, but she's pouring blood out or whatever. But her brother, who's 5 years younger than her, so is probably like 16, 17 years old at this time, he is mad and he is ready to go through the barricade after Buddy Rose. And if you ever touch my sister again, blah, blah, blah. So completely pissed. And afterwards they're talking and Princess, and they're like, they say to her, like, who was that guy? And she's like, oh, that's my younger brother. And they're like, you have not smartened them up yet. And she's like, why would I do that? So
Your family doesn't know how this stuff works.
So back to the very intro, where the passionate wrestling fans still believed. So
Yeah, and they made a point of saying how well that worked with the whole angle, because it was it didn't seem real. It was real. He really was trying to get at Rose and whatnot, and security kind of had to restrain him and remove him from the situation, at least for the time being. I don't remember if they said they kicked him out of the building, but it was definitely real to her 15 or 16-year-old brother at the moment.
yeah. So they all talk about how they leave the territory. Dominic DeNucci gets in contact with Mike Masters, and he wants to put him in a tag team with David Sammartino. So off to New York he goes, and that does sound like a good opportunity. So makes sense to me. Victoria says she wants to wrestle, and everybody told her, look, you got to if you want to get booked, you got to talk to Moolah. She kind of controls everything, and people told her not to do it, and she's like, but I wanted to wrestle, and she doesn't go into any stories, and it's probably not important for the Pacific Northwest, but there seemed to like maybe have been some trauma there. So maybe for another show, that's not necessarily the what they're going for with Tales from the Territory. But if they do the Dark Side of the Ring on Fabulous Moolah, don't be surprised if you see Princess Victoria there.
Yeah, and she did go. She did mention that Roddy specifically told her, "Don't go." He wouldn't tell her why, but he said, "Don't go." And I guess without a concrete reason, she wanted to get booked. She wanted to work, so she went.
Yeah. The Bushwhackers, the sheep herders, they went on to the WWF, and as Luke puts it, they became cartoon characters. He says, you wrestle in the NWA or any of these territories, you are a wrestler. If you go to the WWF, you become a celebrity. He said that's the difference, and he said, we went from the hardcore team to the cartoon character because money.
Yeah,
simply.
Yeah, they were hardcore before it was hardcore, and then they became kind of flag bearers of that cartoon era of the WWF.
Yes, yeah. Each one of these territories has a really interesting story about the shutdown, how they died out, and this one from Portland is totally, maybe not totally different, but it's very different than any other ones that we've heard so far. They hung on until 1992, which when you're talking about the territories, you don't usually say 90 anything.
No.
Obviously, WCW, Turner gobbled up Jim Crockett Promotions, and WCW became a national company alongside WWF. So that was more of a national company, but the territories, JCP and everything, they're gone in the 80s. So 88, I believe, JCP was purchased by WCW or Turner and then renamed WCW. So, but Portland hung around till 1992, and it took a commission being established in Portland to start the ball rolling, and then ultimately Vince McMahon with his, reaching in and grabbing their TV slot that actually.
Exactly. What do the death of almost every territory seem to have in common? The name Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
Yeah. So here's these guys have been running. The Owen family has been running for 60 years in Portland. I'm sorry, 70 years closer in Portland. And Len Denton is the booker, so he's the one telling the story here. Some guy comes, Bruce Anderson. He lobbies to get a commission created for boxing and wrestling in Portland or in Oregon. There wasn't any boxing, so the commission was established, and they focused on wrestling. And the commission wanted 6% of the gate, and Don Owen's like, 70 years I've been doing this and nobody has, I'm not paying anybody anything. Eventually he caves because he realizes these guys can be a problem. They start paying the commission. And then out of this, there comes some unique stories because the commission required no blood, which is common. The Maryland Athletic Commissions today requires no blood. So, if there's a match there that draws blood, the wrestling company's gonna get fined like 10 grand. So this is common around the country even today. But in Portland, they did this no blood thing, and then Matt Bourne goes on TV, says he's going to have a bloody match, and he invites the commissioner to come, and he kind of says to the guys in the back, it's just a work. I'm just working everybody, drop crowd or whatever. Well, he busts himself wide open in this match, and he's pouring blood everywhere. It's a bloody mess, and he tries to say it happened the hard way. It obviously didn't, but the commission shuts them down for a week, and they kind of transition to the they say that the commission was there and that they were doing everything they could do to shut us down. Meanwhile, Vince is trying to take the TV. And I got the impression from the voiceover narration and from the way Denton kind of told the story and transitioned so easily into the Vince stuff that perhaps McMahon was behind the establishment of the commission in Oregon.
It is kind of hinted at. They don't. There's nothing concrete there, but I mean, would it surprise you?
No. And then when it came to the TV, the guy who was running Channel 12 in Portland is retiring, and new guys coming in. Vince McMahon wants to give them $3,500 a week for the television slot. Plus, he's sending a completely produced tape. There's no editing on the TV station's end. So Portland territory is not paying them anything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the reverse model of today. WWF is paying to be on Portland television.
Yep.
And, it's a no-brainer for the next guy that comes in to take the easy money and the better content over the, 70-year established promotion. So that's what happens. And the houses went down immediately, but it sounds like upon getting notice that they were going to be off Channel 12, Don Owen was like, that's it.
Yeah, he didn't have the fight left in him at that point. He was an older gentleman at the time and said, I just don't have it in me. We know where this is headed. I'm not even going to fight it.
Yep. Yeah. So interesting episode. Next week is World Class Championship Wrestling from Texas. Kevin Von Erich is obviously the most notable survivor from that, from the Von Erich family. He's the only survivor.
Yeah.
And he is going to be on the panel. It looks like Chavo Guerrero Jr. is on the panel.
Yeah, they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't give a clear shot of his face and put his name under him. But they spun around the table more than once, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Chavo.
Yeah, Brian Adias and David Manning, both basically wrestled in World Class, and that's it. But they're on the panel as well. Conspicuous by his absence is the Freebird. I thought this is $7 production. You would have thought they would have got Michael Hayes in there.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? You are a wrestling historian. So why do I know David Manning? As he starts to tell one of the stories, I'm like, yeah, I should know. Even before they put his name up, I'm like, I should know this guy. When they put his name up, I immediately, Googled him and saw his wiki page, and he's, ref and booker there. He's not really known for much outside of there. It must have been one of WWE's, biography stories where he told a good portion or a good story, because I feel like I know the guy and should know him better.
So I think he's a doppelganger for a famous sitcom guy. I think he looks just like somebody else on TV.
I mean,
I'm thinking from I can't think of the television show. I can't think of it right. It'll come to me when we're done, but
yeah, we'll figure it out before next week, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. So I think that's what it is, because I had the same feeling. I'm like looking at him, like, wow, he looks really familiar. and I think he's just a doppelganger for somebody else. But
Oh,
yeah, I don't know him from anything. He's just a referee. Sorry, not just a referee. He was a referee and a who did an important job, and he was also the booker in Texas. So we'll get into all that next week. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. It looks like he had a story about some guns and stuff. So these territories, you always got to have your guns involved. All right, so good episode. Not my favorite one, but fun to just have an episode that told the stories of Portland. And I'm sure over the course of the next week, I'll hear some things about how accurate some of these stories were. I heard that last week. I actually heard Dave Meltzer talk about some of the stuff that they talked about with Peter Maivia, that he said there were some wild inaccuracies. That Maivia wouldn't even have been there at that, in those years and things like that. But, hey, it's the Rock's grandpappy, so I'm not going to say.
When the legend, what's the saying? When the legend becomes bigger than the story, print the legend, or something like that.
Yeah. So, all right. That said, we'll get out of here, and we will see you right back here for another episode of the Daily Wrestling News Show tomorrow. John, what's up tomorrow?
Tomorrow on the Daily Wrestling News Show, I really should start looking into these.
We have this. What rare WCW championship is defended this day in 2000? Oh, that's today.
That's today, actually. Yeah.
That was today.
Tomorrow's one of your stories.
What megastar debuted on pay-per-view on this day? It would say Survivor Series 1996 story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So megastar who goes well with this episode. All right. See you tomorrow, folks.
So long.